right. We are excited for this session to get started. This is,
Session number 3, isn't it?
it is session number 3, and I just need to keep on entering passwords on this computer for some reason. Session number 4.
Session number 4.
Mary Lynn.
Human development, yeah.
Oh, okay. I lost count over our time off.
So this is our support for the revised health and phys ed curriculum. It's session number 4. It's an overview of the intermediate changes. And Mary Lynn is going to share with us the traditional territorial acknowledgement.
Okay. So before we begin, we always like to do our local territorial acknowledgement. And here it is. We acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered is part of the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations. Thank you.
All right, so we have with us Deniece Bell from OPHEA. Hey, Deniece.
Hello, good morning.
And you're coming from where are you in the world today?
West side of Toronto.
West side of Toronto. And Mary Lynn coming from the, where are you?
Outside of, I'm on the west side of Chatham and not far from Pancourt, a little French community. So I'm not really part of that community, just happens to be where I live, but that's where I'm at today.
And I'm coming
sweet
from
home.
Canberra. Yeah, it's nice to be home. So we're all in 3 different places, but sharing with you the revisions. So in the chat box, please type away questions that may come up. You're always welcome to unmute yourself. But Deniece is going to share her screen, and then we're going to be ready to go.
Welcome back. Nice to see virtual faces and silent participants. So we are going to go through the intermediate division for supporting human development and sexual health in health and phys ed. And for our new participants, this is the 4th in a series of 5 webinars. The first one was an overview of the social emotional learning skills. And webinars 2, 3, and 4 are dissecting the human development and sexual health by grade level, so primary, junior, and today we're in intermediate. And next week will be our final webinar, mental health in the health and phys ed education. So our objectives today have been consistent, and in this instance, it's just to have a clearer understanding of the components of strand D, which would be healthy living in the intermediate grades. So we are also hoping that you have more confidence and more comfortable in implementing the key concepts to support the change in the 2019 elementary health and phys ed curriculum. And finally, just an increased awareness of some of the resources that are out there and that you can look through OPHEA as a comprehensive kit for you. And then basically, what do you need to know? So I will go through and open a few windows to show you some of those resources, and hopefully you can collaborate with your colleagues with any other things that you can find. So I'm going to highlight another ambassador that we have who may contribute along the way, Jay Walsh, who was away but is now back and joining us as well. So to recap, this is what we discussed in every webinar, which is the subgroups that exist. So you have social emotional learning skills, and that is the umbrella for active living, which is strand B, movement competence skills, strand C, and healthy living, which is now strand D. Any questions about that? We've been there, done that. Okay, it's a good review. The social emotional learning skills are embedded throughout strand B, C, and D. There are ways for you to address those skills. And now more than ever, I would say, we are aware of the importance of social emotional learning skills because our emotions and our situations have changed, and we'll be learning in different formats, doing a lot more within some smaller confines for a few days. So it's something that goes just beyond health and phys ed, but can be integrated in those other curriculum, in the other curricular areas. Okay. So key topics today: delaying sexual activity for intermediate, I should say, preventing pregnancy and sexually transmitted and bloodborne infections, STDs, how gender identity and sexual orientation affect your overall identity and self-concept, and making decisions about sexual health and intimacy. So we will be going into greater detail about gender identity, which is typically a subject area that most educators, I think if you're a generalist, don't always feel comfortable beginning. But once you get started, there's a little bit more comfort because you realize that everybody's sort of struggling a bit. Okay. So the learning summary by topic for grade 7. This is an example for us to review again, horizontal and vertical learning by topics. So the 3 overall expectations, you can see. I'm going to try and use my drawing tool or spotlight here. So across the top here, and then they're cross-referenced to healthy eating, personal safety, substance use, human development, and mental health literacy. So our goal when we are talking about horizontal learning is to say we're going to address each one of these one at a time. So healthy eating would be eating patterns, health problems, food choices, and just solely focusing on there. If we go to vertical learning, we're going to be attacking that through each different topic and focusing on making connections for healthy living. So if we went out to a restaurant, what would we notice? How do our behaviors interact, and the relationships that we have with other people. So you're tying in all 3 of those.
So Deniece,
Yes.
just so that I understand correctly, so the horizontal and vertical learning, could a teacher choose either or to do it either way, or
Yes.
could they do both?
That's a great question. And the answer to that is there's a time and a place, and you need to determine for yourself what is most applicable for your situation. So the decision-making skills, making healthy choices, you would integrate a variety of scenarios so you could address each of the topics that you're teaching to. And then if you are having a specific unit, then you would go and do the horizontal learning and just focus on, for personal safety, you're focusing on the technology and how does the bullying impact us, and being very focused. It might be a unit that you're trying to cover in technology, and then you're tying that into certain areas.
Okay, so this curriculum allows teachers lots of choice in the way that they to put this out into their classroom, eh?
Yes, yes. The goal would be to develop the application of the knowledge in what way seems fit for the time and how you have programmed your design.
Okay, great, thanks.
It's a great question. Okay, continuing on. So again, we're focusing on strand D, which is healthy living. Excuse me. And these are the updates in the 2019 curriculum, which represents our changing time. The bullying, cyberbullying, we're doing a Zoom webinar here, so understanding how to use technology safely, online safety, consent, and you can go through those, but those are the highlights. Ben and Mary Lynn have spoken to, and we've gone through the example on the school policy on when to teach human development and sexual health. And that is typically in the second half of the school year. It allows for classroom teachers, health and phys ed educators to collaborate to build a community. We talked about the fundamental principles and creating a sense of belonging, which will also lead to, ideally, a sense of comfort and belonging, and having some really personal conversations about what some would say is very taboo or really difficult to discuss topics. So when it's science, it's very clear cut, the anatomy, but it's actually the same in health and phys ed. This is what is happening in human development and sexual health. The question is, how can we help educators deliver this message in a comfortable way for both them and themselves and the students? So we're going to dive into consent, and it's throughout the curriculum. It's explored in personal safety as well as human development and sexual health for grade 7. And then it is solely through human development and sexual health in grade 8. Okay. And that can be found in the curriculum. I was going to sort of open my page, but page 253 and 281 for grade 7 students and grade 8. Okay. So here we have an example of Strand. Explain the importance of having shared understanding with a partner about the following: delaying sexual activity until they're older, reasons for not engaging in sexual activity, the concept of consent, the legal age of consent, how consent is communicated, and the need to communicate clearly with each other. So going back to webinar 1, social emotional learning skills, they're tagged here for you: A1.1 emotions, 1.4 relationships, and then moving on to critical thinking, 1.5 self and 1.6 critical thinking. So those conversations allow for the students to practice, refine, learn how to address their social emotional learning. Questions, chime in, what you've noticed, what teachers have said. Anybody?
I think the importance of consent and the clear connections to that are I think increasingly important, and to provide tools and clarity around that is essential. So looking here, I see that, and I really like also in our current time. I think the context in which we're recording this is we're in the middle of an emergency situation in Ontario and the world around being healthy with COVID-19. So the other part is like we're all managing our emotion, and those like social emotional skills that you've said, Deniece, are so important. So I think that, things we do to build those skills with our students and the explicit and intentional building of those skills comes back and helps us as we work through looking at this. Yes, this is within a sexual activity, but emotions, relationships, self, and thinking. I like the thread of how it includes sexual activity, but it's beyond that as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to add that consent, that discussion starts so early with our kids. Like, it's not new in grade 7 to talk about consent. My little guys, that my grandkids know about consent, and who they might not know that word, but they certainly know, that people aren't supposed to touch them in certain places that aren't their parents. And so, that whole consent can just be built on, I think, all the way through the years.
Yeah. And Marianne,
Sure.
Again in seminar 4, but in the 219 curriculum, consent is taught right from grade 1 now all the way to grade 8. 7 and 8 it becomes about connected to sexual activity, but certainly in the younger grades around personal safety. But it is about that idea of your body is your own, and then, you know, and asking each other permission for anything. It's not just about that. So I think it's really strengthened, that really leads to great conversation about it in grade 7, and it's not sequence now. So
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
great. Yeah. Deniece, I wanted to add, and this is, I've been working on a project, and I applaud you for continuing to do your learning in these circumstances. And I just, if you park it in the back of your mind, that in September, OPHEA will be launching a support resource that's called Sexual Violence Prevention. And it's specifically in terms of grades 7, 8, 9. There's great lessons, but there is an incredible video that will be out about 3 minutes long on consent. And so if you just park that when you're engaging your teachers with this, and remember that it's a great companion piece to this expectation, and really, and it's speaking directly at students as well, by one of our Ontario educators in sexual violence prevention, which ultimately comes down to consent. It's a consent-based approach to relationships.
So Melissa Dent in the chat room saying better than the T video. Is that, does somebody know what that means? I'm not up on my better than the T video.
Melissa, you're 1 or 2 slides ahead of me.
Okay. The T video is great as an example of, you know, when you offer something, if they want it or don't want it. So the T video is an analogy for consent. But this one it's a great companion to it, because it's essentially speaking directly about consent, what consent is, what consent is not, how consent is communicated, everything here. And there's no ands, ifs, or buts when the kids are able to watch the video. It's very clear. And then the T video can continue as part of, here's an example of what it might look like that's not necessarily connected to sexual activity. So
everyone knows this video, because
Melissa,
Rod's like, I knew this from 4 years ago. So you know. I'm glad Deniece, you're teaching us about this. This is great. Thank you, Deniece.
So that's fantastic, because as you know, it's 2019 that this curriculum was revised. 2020, here we are in the middle of a pandemic, and we're all still trying to keep things going and rolling. And that's fantastic, because Joanne comes from originally a secondary background, so she's very well versed in the intermediate senior division, and now works with the elementary individuals. So when we talk about consent and teaching strategies, one idea here is just to initiate conversation. Thanks, Melissa, for bringing that up with a video that says consent. It's as simple as T. So I'll give you about 60 seconds of this video, and just give me a minute to get my screen.
Melissa knows me well. She's like, here's the clean version, Ben.
Yes, yes. And that is definitely a factor as well. Oh, thank you.
Still struggling with consent. Just imagine, instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, you know, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please. That's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious.
Okay. So that's the tea video, and there are a few more minutes to go through. But another example of how can we sort of lighten an example to a very, very serious and important topic. And I think that was beautifully done. There are a few different other examples out there. And as Joanne said, we'll be privy to another one coming from OPHEA. Okay, so we'll go back here. Sharing?
You're sharing, we see it.
Okay. And then another activity here is 4 corners. So there are some statements that can be shared in the classroom. For example, so you would put the students, you have agree, yes, but, no, but, disagree, and in the middle, I'm not sure, I don't know. And then just sharing some of these statement examples. So you're respecting each other's, the other person's boundaries, saying no can be communicated in different ways. We should be able to date freely. Oral sex is not sex. I'm in a relationship, that means sex. And giving students an opportunity, once the teacher reads one example, letting them shuffle into one of the corners, having a few minutes to discuss, and then going through that example. So it's not ideally as threatening to say, this is what I know or this is what I don't know. It's sort of like, let's have a discussion about this. And you're not saying that this is who you are, what you believe. It's kind of like, what have you heard and how have you heard this information? Okay. Any questions on 4 corners?
Great way to get discussion going.
Yeah. So we, you know, icebreakers, videos, we like to use different examples of teaching tools. So for gender identity and gender expression in the intermediate grades, that's where our focus is going to be a little bit more. And we talked about the curriculum, and we've shown this slide in webinar 2 and webinar 3. And this is now focused on grade 7 and 8. You will see that there is explicit discussion about gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, sexual and self-concept in grade 8. There are opportunities to address gender inclusive approaches throughout the curriculum. We referred to simply saying they instead of boy or girl, and assigning that language, so subtle changes, and making everybody responsible for their actions. So in grade 8, demonstrate an understanding of gender identity, gender expression. We could also apply the 4 corners activity to this as well, by using the gender unicorn. So the gender unicorn, this is from the Trans Student Educational Resource, and it speaks to a lot of language that not everybody typically refers to. The gender identity here, gender expression and how it relates, in addition to sex assigned at birth, who you're physically attracted to or whom, and emotionally attracted to. So these terms help individuals have a dialogue that is inclusive for many, that typically are excluded in conversations when we leave a binary male-female, this is what you fall into category.
And Melissa Dent in the chat saying that she loves the gender unicorn and uses it with her class.
Oh, fantastic. Feel free, Melissa, to share any other things that you also appreciate, because I think the more that people develop comfort in referring to vocabulary and terminology, it just allows for, I think, a more rich discussion. Okay, thank you for sharing that. So there are many different there's the gingerbread, there's there's a few different examples of how to address these specific terms, and this is the one that we chose to use here today. So in the gender unicorn, we would approach this with 4 corners as well. You could be in the gymnasium. You would put sexual orientation in one corner, gender identity, sex assigned at birth, gender expression, and again in the middle would be, I'm not sure, I want to pass, I don't feel comfortable. So you're allowing students to connect with their social emotional learning and how they feel in that situation. And some of the statements that might be tied to it can be true, false, or just conversation starters that don't have a right or wrong answer. Examples being, in this instance, they're purely definitions, refers to a person's sense of sexual attraction to people of the same or different sex. Sorry. And so if we go back to that second bullet point, students would say, oh, I think that means gender expression. Why do you think that? What are some words, or what have you discussed with friends, family, or not discussed that leads you to believe that that's where that falls in that activity? If you're using it in the gymnasium, you can add locomotion. So they're skipping, they're hopping, they're jogging. You're doing 2 laps, so you're integrating health and phys ed as well as, health with phys ed.
Mm-hmm.
Questions about statements? Comments? Okay. So gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation are basically the way that you are connected to the way that you see yourself in your interactions with others. And definitely in the intermediate grades for some students, it has a huge impact on the development of your self-concept if you feel like you don't have a place or a sense of belonging, people to talk to. And that actually goes for any category of development. So whether you're in adulthood and figuring out different things about yourself, those types, the identity, expression, and orientation impact your self-concept. Ontario Human Rights Commission. Here I'm just going to read from the slide. Each person's internal and individual experience of gender. Okay, so a sense of being a woman, a man, both, neither, or anywhere along the gender spectrum. And you saw that pulled from the statements in 4 corners, refers to a person's internal sense or feeling. And that these are pulled straight from the curriculum, these sample statements. So again, just to remind that it's a great tool to use the teacher prompts because they're there in the shape that somebody has had that question or that concern, and we're providing ways for them to address that. People may see their gender identity as fluid and moving between different genders at different times in their life. I think that's very powerful for the Ontario Human Rights Commission and not discriminating based on gender identity, gender expression. Assigned sex versus gender identity. Couple different ways to look at the ideas. And if we think about the right side here, gender identity, it's identified by the individual. So my psychological, social, sensual, emotional body, how I feel. So woman, man, two-spirit, genderqueer, trans are all terms that would refer to your gender identity. It's through the nervous system. It's how you think about yourself. And again, tied to the emotions. So assigned sex, typically when we are born, somebody yells out, "It's a girl!" And that's what we are sometimes encouraged to go through in terms of life, because as you can see in grade 1, we referred to the individual who said to me, Miss Bell, are you a boy or a girl? Based on cultural expectations. I had short hair, I still have short hair. So she assigned that to me, that I was a boy, even though it had nothing to do with my assigned sex. So it's on government or official forms. Medical professionals say it. It helps with bodies and anatomy. We refer to science. And it's the chromosomes, hormones, external genitals, and internal organs. Okay. Question, comments, concerns? Okay, so not everybody fits into the categories. This is where we have intersex here. And it's the umbrella term when we don't categorize someone as male or female. So it's just, they're not boxes for female and male. If you're born with a vagina and you have internal testes, you have a third chromosome, higher levels of testosterone, then we would say intersex. And one example for me in terms of athletics is Caster Semenya, who competes as in the 800 meters, and there's been a lot of discussion that based on her intersex, she should not be able to run with the women. So a lot of discussion in terms of understanding gender identity, assigned sex, and that's an example in the athletic realm for health and phys ed.
Deniece, so to be honest, I've never heard, I have two things. So first of all, I've never heard of Twospirit before, so I'm wondering if you could address that. And the other thing is, I think I asked you in the last session as well, ways that teachers could use language that would help, and I'm coming up with the wrong, but I'm not coming up with terms, but so that you're not identifying gender explicitly, so that you have suggested in some of them. So I'm just wondering if you could share some of those as well as explain Twospirit for me.
Okay. Excuse me, sorry. So Twospirit refers to our indigenous ancestors and individuals who possess the qualities of both male and female, and are regarded as very, I would say, powerful, exceptional individuals when it comes to their community and the indigenous community.
Okay.
So
Thank
Twospirit
you.
is tied to indigenous individuals.
Okay.
Okay. And when we're talking about vocabulary and how teachers can address that, I think it's very awkward to begin if it's something that we've been programmed to always say, all right, guys, come on in. Especially in the classroom, it's boys and girls. And we discussed a few ways of, even in health and phys ed class, when we're making groups, it transfers into the classroom as well as anybody who's born in January through June. You're going to be in this half of the class. And I think the key tip that I always use is folks. And you'll see that a lot of, I guess, younger individuals will spell it F-O-L-X for folks.
Oh.
And it's just a way to say we're including everybody. And the trick is to really think about it at first, and it's not easy, and use those community words. We're used to saying a fireman, but we've adjusted to saying firefighter. A policeman has been adjusted to police officer. And so I think when we make those connections about what was typically male-female, we can help individuals realize that it transfers over to when we're talking about bodies, right? Bodies, that have penises, bodies that have breasts, and using, again, I say folks, I say individuals, people, and those are all ways that we can steer clear of saying boy, girl, guys, ladies, gentlemen, just say people, and that's inclusive.
Yeah, it was gender neutral was the term I was looking for earlier, language. And I really like the ideas that you've given us in order to do that. And I think I spoke that if you ever, when you have a child in your classroom who may be trans or questioning gender, my experience, we had somebody like that in one of my schools, and my experience was the teachers were automatically understanding and adapted their language almost without having to think about it. Made a couple of missteps, and then as soon as they did that, realized the missteps and changed things in the way that they said things. So it is doable, especially when there's a beautiful young human in your classroom that you're caring about. So.
And I think as an educator myself, sorry, somebody else.
No, that's okay. I think the other thing that we try to encourage some of our other teachers to do as well is the language that we adopt around a partner and a spouse, and significant other and all those things. Because when we're talking about relationships, that's the other part of it where we tend to talk about your boyfriend or your girlfriend. But if we can do that, and we also, when we have students, we give students scenarios that they're trying to problem solve, that we make sure that the names are not gender specific, but that we provide them with that latitude so that they can see themselves in the curriculum and in our conversations about partnerships and relationships. So not just addressing the students, but the materials that we generate and the way we speak about them, and have students write their own scenarios in the classroom.
Absolutely. Thanks for adding that in too.
And just to sort of piggyback on that, in the last webinars, I identified a few examples of literature that could be used. And I didn't do that in this webinar. But again, there are some really great novels for intermediate students, and that can be tied into, again, we talk about integrating the curriculum, so opportunities for book clubs and things that will help foster some rich conversation with the students, and taking on point of view. Mary Lynn, your point was also fantastic, because you said this little human being that's in front of you. And I think one of the best pieces of advice I got as an early teacher or beginning teacher was, treat this child as if it's your own, right? And you may have these aspirations of who or what you expect these little people to accomplish, but you need to meet them where they are. So if they are here, then you need, if this is your expectation, bring it down here and help scaffold in a way that they can achieve that. So for these individuals that may be struggling and feeling like they don't have somebody to talk to, I always say, regardless of what I believe or what my value system is, I'm here to help nurture and allow this child to be their best self. And sometimes that is really difficult, right, to do for people. So gender identity language here, this is what people use. And again, the Two-Spirit, some might say questioning, because they grew up in faith or a location that was very different than where they're residing now, or they have gone off and are in an opportunity where they can figure out, oh, I didn't realize this about myself. So they may be questioning, they may be agender, genderqueer. So those are different words that you can discuss with students and how they apply to individuals.
And Kristen puts in the chat that definitions can be found in the glossary for some of this language. Like the Two-Spirit definition is on page 316, she writes. An indigenous person who possesses both a masculine and feminine spirit. The term can also be used to identify gender, sexual, and spiritual identities outside of traditional Western definitions and binaries. So thanks, Kristen, for that. That's great to remind us that we have the glossary available, that we don't need to just know it off the top of the head, but we can look at the glossary in our preparations. Melissa Dent also chimes in and she says that she has some picture books and novels available to be borrowed from the LKDSB Equity Library as well. So that kind of links back to the concept Deniece said about novels and literature resources that can help and support this process as well.
Mm-hmm. And this, the identity language on this slide is the English language, but to accompany what Kristen has added, different cultural traditions have 3, 4, or more possible gender identities. But we have adopted this binary male, female, and that's who we are. And, you know, just think about, we say tomboy. Why? Because I liked sports, because we were directed into assigning and putting people into boxes. And I think the language allows for a little bit more fluidity in terms of saying, I don't have to be just this. And again, I'm not good at math. Well, that's not accurate. I think people, because of people's expectations of what you should be able to accomplish, you feel that way. So I think, again, opportunity and language provides an opportunity to create change in addition to keeping people boxed, and it's how we choose to use it. So moving on, gender expression defined. So we had gender identity, gender expression, how a person publicly presents or expresses their gender. So behavior and outward appearance. And again, from the Ontario Human Rights Commission, we will look at examples. So the clothing, makeup, body modification, their name, their pronouns, voice, gestures, stance, and gait. You will find that a lot of companies, organizations have adopted putting pronouns. So I go by she and they, and that allows somebody else to understand what I want to be referred to and to value my position. He and him, and it's typically because people, an individual is trans, or again, I'm going to use myself as an example. If I've shaved my head completely bald, which I have, and when I was fit and had more muscles, they would say, are you a boy or a girl? So by putting my pronouns out there, there isn't any type of discussion. It is simply, this is how you address me, as she and they. Okay? Some people will say they and them, he and him, and that they is what we talked about, Mary Lynn, an opportunity to use gender language. So it's to challenge the norms. Questions, comments? Okay. So this is how we use our bodies to express who we are. Okay. Relevant, we have here, anybody know Dwayne Wade? Basketball?
Absolutely. Okay.
So we have a clip here. One of Dwayne Wade's children. Actually, you know what? Let's just show the clip. How about that? And
and his partner was on America's Got Talent, I believe. That's she was very famous in our house, maybe more famous than Dwayne Wade for a while.
Nice. Yes. Okay, here we go. Dwayne Wade. I'm an Ellen fan, so I'm using the clip of him on Ellen talking about his daughter,
proud allies as well. And we take our roles and our responsibility as parents very seriously. So when our child comes home with a question, when our child comes home with an issue, when our child comes home with anything, it's our job as parents to listen to that, to give them the best information that we can, the best feedback that we can. And that doesn't change because sexuality is now involved in it. So once Zaya, our 12-year-old, came home, and first Zion, everybody, I don't know if everyone knows, originally named Zion born as a boy, came home and said, hey, so I want to talk to you guys. You know, I think going forward, I'm ready to live my truth. And I want to be referenced as she and her. I would love for you guys to call me Zaya. And so internally, now is our job to, one, go out and get information, to reach out to every relationship that we have. My wife reached out to everybody on the cast of Pose. We're just trying to figure out as much information we can to make sure that we give our child the best opportunity to be, you know, her best self.
So, just an example there of, in the relevant media example that teachers can pull from to initiate some conversation with their classes. And again, we talk about where your school board covers a large area compared to when I'm working in Brampton and the population density and the cultures that exist here. You know, speaking as a Black educator, this is something that would create a lot of dialogue in our classroom for Caribbean students. And I think bringing in those real life examples and how it affects people. These are two superstars who have embraced their child where others may not have embraced their child, and using resources and finding legitimate information to help create that sense of shared knowledge for not just their family, but others around them. And I thought it was pretty fantastic. So today we've discussed horizontal and vertical learning. We talked about consent, and there will be a new video coming out from OPHEA for the intermediate division, and gender identity and gender expression for grade 8. So that's just a little recap, synopsis. I took you to this slide, teaching tools, OPHEA.net, and you can see that things with the green box will tell you that things have been updated, and they're on the OPHEA teachingtools.net, as well as always changing. There's an intermediate resource, and your school board is subscribed. So that means that everybody has access to OPHEA and all of the tools that are out on that site. However, they need to create their own individual login, and that way they can order digital documents, have it sent to them, and or order some hard resources and pamphlets for the students. The curriculum expectation chart is also on the page, so you'll see it says 2015 on the left, 2019 on the right, and it shows you everything that has been adapted. These are additional resources. Melissa, you seem to be a wealth of knowledge as well, so please put anything else out there that individuals can come to this webinar and find some more things and have discussions about, some book titles and where to find them. It's great. These are Ministry of Education sites, and your blog link, which is a compilation of all of the fantastic learning that you folks have created, in addition to OPHEA, AGAL, School Mental Health Ontario, and next week we'll be digging a little bit deeper into the School Mental Health Ontario resources. So if you want to get ahead, go take a look at that, and even use it yourself in this surreal time that we're going through here.
Yeah, super timely. I think next week I'm very excited for all of this learning, but I think that we did not anticipate when we planned this that we would have this mental health and supporting that in the curriculum, but the alignment with what's happening and how do we support our students. I think it's great to see how that'll fit in the curriculum, and then how can we do that going forward in our learning environments as they are changing. So any questions you have, you can type in the chat box, and I know Deniece will be willing and eager to answer and share. We have a feedback form, tinyurl.com/HPE1 LKDSB. So you're able to give us any feedback around the sessions. And we want to say thank you. Thank you, Deniece. Thank you, Jay Walsh. We appreciate you being part of this session. Thank you for folks who were part of this, Kevin and Melissa. And a little earlier that you have to stick around with us, but we appreciate that. And this will be posted online for folks to view at their own discretion. So thank you very much, Deniece.